Hi, it's Xanthe here. I'm just going to go and try and talk about why I'm not going back to calling myself autistic. Written some notes because my brain forgets things. Right, remembers lots of things and forgets other things. Okay, so what I saw recently, last few days, is someone with a massive social media platform basically confess that they are self-diagnosed and they're making excuses not to get diagnosis because they're scared it's going to take away their identity, their the validation that they have, and they also admitted that they don't think they'd meet the criteria clinically. This is kind of problematic, I think, because they are giving out misinformation, saying that there's certain mild traits of various things as autism when it may well not be, and by their own admission they don't really match the criteria, so they have huge influence to change how it is perceived so that it's just seen as a mild quirk. This is the neurodiversity version of autism, by the way. I call it nautism because it's no resemblance to the original medical version. Nautistics is what I call neurodiversity advocate, self-diagnosed autistics. And also there are some that go to neurodiversity affirmation places to get diagnosis, and I've also seen some others that get burnt out and then convince a clinician that their burnout is autism and become basically advocates online or preaching with certain narratives, calling people like me a troll because I have my own opinions, and making a lot of money out of it. Some of them are. It's whatever is currently in vogue. Okay, so let's go back why I'm not going to call myself autistic. I used to, by the way, and I've had so many people on social media insist that I am, and I must be misdiagnosed bipolar. Okay, so let's go back to my notes. Right, so back in 2010, my son was formally diagnosed with Aspergers. Just around about his 7th birthday. He was getting assessed just before 7th birthday and just after. Now he had issues that were picked up by teachers, caregivers, all sorts. It was pretty obvious that something was up. And that's what really irks me about these people claiming late diagnosis or late discovery is the word they use now. They didn't have these issues. So anyway, where am I going? Anyway, because he and I shared quite a lot of traits, for instance, the sensory issues to do with food. Like, for example, since a young child I had to have every bit of weird texture like fat and gristle cut off meat, otherwise I can't eat it. And one of my aunties also has that, so Mum goes, oh, that's where she got it from. Anyway, there are traits in my family. Okay, so when something's a trait, it's a personality quirk, there doesn't need a diagnosis, right? Diagnosis should only be given if there is clinically significant impairment. But anyway, all these people jumped on the bandwagon with all the ego and money is what it's all about, and politics. It's a political movement. Anyway, let's get back to this. Anyway, so he was diagnosed, and the reason he was diagnosed is to try and get some supports at school, because he was getting bullied by both the students and the teachers, and I ended up changing schools. But anyway, in 2013, the DSM-V came in Australia. So what they did is they made autism spectrum disorder. So we had to go and get a letter for just changing schools again by that stage. to high school. They start high school early, next school, and because otherwise they said if he's having a meltdown at school, they would just expel him without any accommodation at all. Okay, so 2015, I had another breakdown, had a couple big ones. I was hospitalised and they formally diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. And you could say that I'm half diagnosed Aspergers because it's in some of my medical records, but I wasn't assessed, right? So, arguably, well, there was an assessment, but in my medical records, but with the bipolar diagnosis, but I actually have no memory of whatsoever, so I must have dissociated, so I actually have a current diagnosis of PTSD. Anyway, going off on tangents here. In 2018, because there was a question mark with the Aspergers in the hospital, they said, oh, we can't see it. Yet they listed some traits, which is kind of funny, but anyway. So I go back to New Zealand, 2015, because Australian government wouldn't help me, right? I had no choice. Marriage breakup. And 2018 I finally had an autism spectrum disorder assessment, which they kind of combine with Asperger's test as well in the public system, because they wanted to know what else was going on, because they called it a psychological assessment because they're also kind of trying to screen for other shit. And that's when they picked up dissociation and anxiety. Okay, so there were several in-person interviews. There was also an interview with my parents. This was with a psychologist. There's a really long wait because this is 2018, so came back in 2015, so everything takes ages. So at this stage they're still fluffing around with my meds. Okay, so she concluded, and I've already read out in recent videos, extracts of the report. She said there are features, but I don't, talking to a psychiatrist who's treating me and the mental health nurse who talked to me, they believe that I didn't meet threshold for ASD. So anyway, she believed that the bipolar 1 disorder diagnosis is correct after talking to these other clinicians, and diagnosed formally, for the first time, formally, PTSD, even though it had been suggested in Australia, and social anxiety disorder, to explain why I had the mutism in my childhood. Okay. I'm trying to jump ahead because the video will cut out if I talk too long. Right. Okay, so I wrote, I'd written a memoir in the last year of my marriage, which I've published later, called Bipolar. I call it Bipolar Cringe because it's cringe-worthy to read about when I found it. It was about the open marriage shit and how I dissociated into an alter ego to cope with all of this shit, basically. And anyway, I was identifying in it as an Aspie, Aspergers. I got a shitload of abuse from some online strangers who were obsessed with me because they were mad at me that I stopped calling myself autistic. And of course then that was in the book. All they wanted to do was shit on that book, and they did. They left fake and shitty reviews. Arguably, it's not a brilliant piece of writing, yet it's very insightful in the way that if you want to see what it's like when someone is unwell, trying to frame something else. I was identifying strongly as autistic, and even in the psych unit I was saying I was autistic. It's actually in my medical notes. Okay, so anyway, the PTSD was formally assessed. I've been in treatment for 4 years. Considered now to have mental injury. Still, it's not completely better, and I'm still having to manage the 2 diagnoses of bipolar type 1 disorder, which has the worst highs. So it has severe depression and severe highs, but doesn't have to have depression. Okay, getting hot. I'm in trouble with my temperature regulation at the moment. So fast forward 2022, just this last month, I had a second assessment for autism with a psychiatrist. Went private this time. I've read out some of the extracts of his letter. He wrote a letter rather than a report, just to save me some money, because I didn't need all the full report shit, because I've already had that all before, right? Basically what he concluded was that I would fit under the DSM-IV diagnosis of PDD-NOS, they call it, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is also known as atypical autism, but would be under threshold for Aspergers under the DSM-IV and under the threshold for autism spectrum disorder. Yeah, this is what's confusing. He said you are definitely on the autism spectrum, so who knows where the cut-off is for that. And he did admit that there is subjectivity about it. Now, just a note about New Zealand is they still use both the DSM-IV and 5 to diagnose, but I've found out from my psychologist that they use the ICD-10 and 11 to code. So that's, they use 2 different things. There are 2 manuals for classifications, etc. Anyway, he said that I should call myself neurodivergent. I already said how I felt about all that shit a couple of videos ago. He said, and this is what was also confusing, that PDD-NOS is not folded into ASD. It seems like when they reclassified, not everyone who met criteria for under DSM-IV would go into DSM-V. It's hard to find much information about it, but I just found this old piece, a journal article from 2014. It says the comparison of DSM-IV pervasive developmental disorder and DSM-V autism spectrum disorder prevalence in an epidemiologic sample, something like that. It was looking at a Korean grouping population, and quite a large sample size, and they were looking at previously diagnosed people with the changes, and summary here was the results. Most children with autistic disorder, or I think it was also called autism disorder, that's like the classic autism, so that's the more obvious presentations. So there were, previously in the 4 there was autistic or autism disorder, Aspergers disorder, and then there was the PD-NOS. Okay, and then they sort of just made it into a big spectrum thing with different, where they tried out levels, I think 1, 2, 3, and then they tried out support needs or something. Okay, so it said here most people with autistic disorder 99%, Asperger disorder 92%, and PD-NOS 63% met DSM-V ASD criteria, whereas 1%, 8%, 32% respectively met SCD criteria. remaining children, 2% had other psychopathy, principality, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, anxiety disorder. So SCD, it says, was social communication disorder. I haven't looked into that. I'm diagnosed with social anxiety disorder, currently mild, and the social and communication difficulties I have is mainly put down to mental injury from PTSD. It's very complex. My picture kind of looks similar from the outside perhaps, but there could be different reasons. So I have had a lot of abuse, in my opinion. That self-diagnosis is unwise, and a lot of people that are these big advocates, influencers or whatever, they don't even have solid diagnosis. They have no childhood history, and some of them admit that they had no issues previously. Then they got burnt out and convinced the clinician their burnout is autism, and they get really shitty if you dare question this shit. That's how fragile it is, and they're so desperate for validation. It's all about validation. So you can actually pay a lot of money now to some neurodiversity affirmation outfit, more than what you would pay a clinician, and get a discovery based on your own biased thing. It's a load of shit. Main reason that I am against all of this, apart from people profiting from vulnerable people, is because it trivialises the seriousness of the medical diagnosis. The diagnosis should only be given if there is impairment. Yeah, I have clinically significant features, but I'm still below threshold for diagnosis. The psychiatrist who assessed me recently said, I don't know why they downplayed it in your first assessment. I said, well, they did that on purpose because to make sure I get therapy for PTSD. This identity, I decided when I went into it with open mind, I thought to myself, what if I don't have bipolar? He said, no, definitely bipolar. Because I asked him to look at the bipolar as well. The other thing was that some of these people with the neurodiversity movement are saying, they're using the narrative that women are being misdiagnosed with bipolar and borderline personality disorder. That can be harmful because if people do meet the criteria for those things, they could have access to services or treatments to help reduce the impact, such as medications and therapy. Same with PTSD. I've definitely improved a lot with therapy. Anyway, thank you.